The snow-covered streets of Mill Creek glistened under the soft glow of Christmas lights. Tiago Monroe, a 12-year-old boy with warm brown eyes and a beanie pulled low over his ears, trudged through the icy paths with a worn wicker basket in hand. Inside were neatly wrapped gingerbread cookies, their spicy aroma a stark contrast to the biting chill of the air. Fresh cookies, only $1 each. Tiago's voice rang out with an optimism that belied the shivering cold. He smiled at passers-by, his face lit with an unshakable hope, though most hurried past, bundled in their winter coats, avoiding his gaze. He wasn't selling cookies for holiday cheer or pocket money. Every penny was for his mother, Joanna. She had grown too weak to leave their tiny home, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by sickness. Tiago knew the world hadn't been kind to them, but his heart carried a fierce determination. He couldn't lose her. As he stopped outside the bustling diner on Main Street, the door swung open and a wave of warmth and chatter spilled out. A man with a booming voice and a kind smile leaned down. "Still at it?" "Tiago?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Hensley." Tiago replied, lifting his basket. "Would you like to buy some cookies?" Mr. Hensley fished in his pocket and handed over a crumpled $5 bill. "I'll take 3. Keep the change, kiddo. Thank you." Tiago's face lit up. Moments like these gave him hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. As night fell, Tiago headed home. Snowflakes clung to his curls as he walked past rows of festively decorated houses. Inside those homes, families gathered around trees, laughter spilling out like music. Tiago's chest tightened, but he kept his head high. Christmas had always been his favorite time of year, though now it felt like a distant dream, a memory of better days. When he reached the edge of town, he paused, staring up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter tonight, twinkling with a kind of promise. He whispered to himself, "If there's magic out there, I hope it finds us this year." In the silence that followed, Tiago thought he heard something, a faint jingling sound carried on the wind. He shook his head and chuckled. "I must be tired." But far off, hidden by the tall pines, the first ripple of an extraordinary event was beginning to unfold. The faint jingling sound grew louder as Tiago trudged along the snow-covered path toward home. At first, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks, but the noise carried a rhythm, a steady clink, clink, clink that grew sharper with each step. As he rounded a bend near the park, his heart jolted. A large red sled hurtled down the steep hill ahead, skidding wildly out of control. Its polished runners glinted in the moonlight, throwing up sprays of snow as it careened toward the thick line of trees at the bottom. "Watch out!" Tiago shouted instinctively, though no one seemed to hear. A split second later, the sled smashed into a sturdy oak with a gut-wrenching crunch. Tiago froze, his breath clouding the air. He clutched his basket tightly as he stared at the wreckage. A plume of snow and splinters hung in the air like a ghostly mist. "Help! Somebody help!" a voice cried out, pulling Tiago from his shock. Dropping his basket, he sprinted toward the crash site, his boots sinking into the deep snow. As he approached, he saw a man stumbling away from the sled. He was unlike anyone Tiago had ever seen. His beard was a wild, snowy white, and his bright red coat looked like something from a storybook. "Please help me," the man gasped, clutching at Tiago's arm. His blue eyes were wide with panic. "My wife. She's trapped inside and she's in labor." Tiago blinked, trying to make sense of the scene. Inside the sled, a woman lay crumpled, clutching her stomach. Her face was pale, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. Despite the bizarre circumstances, her pain was unmistakably real. "We've got to get her out," Tiago said, his voice steady even as his heart raced. The man nodded frantically. "I'll lift. You pull her free." Together, they worked quickly, though the sled's twisted frame resisted their efforts. Tiago dug his heels into the snow, using every ounce of strength he had to help. Finally, with a metallic groan, the woman slipped free of the wreckage. "Thank you," she whispered weakly as the man cradled her in his arms. "We need to find shelter," Tiago said, scanning their surroundings. He knew this area well. There was an old abandoned cabin not far from the park. "There's a cabin nearby," Tiago said, pointing toward the woods. "Follow me." The man didn't hesitate. He lifted his wife as carefully as he could, nodding at Tiago with a mix of urgency and gratitude. "Lead the way, son." As Tiago ran ahead, his mind spun. Who were these people? And why did the man look so eerily like the illustrations of Santa Claus he'd seen in books? But there was no time to ask questions now. The woman's muffled cries of pain spurred him forward, the cabin coming into view through the trees like a faint promise of refuge. The night, which had once seemed so ordinary, was about to take a turn that neither Tiago nor his unlikely companions would ever forget. The icy wind bit at Tiago's face as he led the way through the dense forest. Snow crunched beneath his boots, and his breath puffed in hurried clouds. The old cabin, dark and forgotten, loomed ahead like a secret guardian of the woods. "There," Tiago called, pointing toward a weathered structure. The man behind him nodded, his arms trembling as he carried his wife, who groaned softly in pain. They reached the cabin, and Tiago pushed open the creaky door, revealing a dim, cold space with a sagging roof, but enough walls to shield them from the wind. "It's not much, but it's better than freezing out there," Tiago said, lighting a small kerosene lamp he had found on the mantel. Its faint glow cast flickering shadows across the room. The man laid his wife gently on an old wooden bench, cushioning her with his crimson coat. "Clara, hang on," he murmured, his voice thick with worry. Tiago crouched beside the woman, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to keep her warm." Rummaging through the cabin, he found a moth-eaten blanket and draped it over her. He noticed her face was slick with sweat despite the cold, her hands clutching her swollen belly. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling. The man, Santa Claus or whoever he was in full panic mode. He paced the room, muttering to himself and tugging at his beard. This isn't supposed to happen. The sleigh wasn't supposed to fail, and Clara, Oh, dear heavens! Tiago grabbed his arm, surprising him with his firm grip. "Focus," the boy said, his voice steady. "What do we need to do for her?" "I don't know," the man stammered, his eyes wide with desperation. I'm not. You're not a doctor," Tiago finished for him, nodding grimly. "But I've seen my mom help our neighbors before when they couldn't afford a hospital. We can figure this out." The man stared at Tiago as if seeing him for the first time, then nodded. "Tell me what to do." Tiago looked around the room, his mind racing. He spotted an old metal pot and gestured toward it. "There's a well out back. Fill that with water and bring it in here. We'll need it to clean up and keep her hydrated." The man moved quickly, grabbing the pot and disappearing into the snowy night. Tiago turned back to Clara, her eyes fluttering open to meet his. "You're very brave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're the brave one, ma'am," Tiago said gently. "We're going to get through this. I promise." When the man returned with the pot of water, Tiago worked quickly, improvising a system to boil it using the lamp's flame and metal scraps he found in the cabin. Clara let out a sharp cry, her pain growing stronger. "It's happening," she gasped, clutching the bench. "The baby's coming." "Stay calm," Tiago said, though his own heart was hammering. He turned to the man. "Help her sit up and make sure she's supported." For the next hour, Tiago did everything he could with the limited resources at hand. He guided Clara through her contractions, encouraged her when she grew weak, and used the boiled water and blanket to create as clean a space as possible. Finally, with a piercing cry that echoed through the cabin, a new sound filled the room, a baby's wail. Tiago held the tiny, squirming bundle in his trembling hands, his face breaking into a grin. "It's a boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara reached out, tears streaming down her face. The man, now kneeling beside her, let out a choked laugh as he gently took the baby from Tiago and placed him in Clara's arms. "Thank you," the man said, looking at Tiago with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You saved us." But Tiago, though exhausted and shaking, only smiled. "I think he's the real miracle," he said, nodding at the baby. As the baby's cries softened, the room fell quiet, save for the crackle of the makeshift flame. But in that silence, something extraordinary lingered, an unspoken bond between a boy, a man who seemed impossibly familiar, and the miracle they had all just witnessed. The cabin was still except for the gentle crackle of the makeshift flame and the quiet coos of the newborn. Tiago sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, exhausted but alert. Clara rested on the bench, her baby cradled tightly against her chest, her face pale but radiant with relief. The man knelt beside her, his gloved hand brushing back her damp hair. "Clara," he murmured, his voice trembling. "You're incredible." She smiled weakly. "We're both lucky," she said, her eyes drifting to Tiago. "Thanks to this young man." Tiago rubbed the back of his neck, his cheeks flushing under their praise. "I just did what anyone would have done." The man turned to him, his expression soft but serious. "Not everyone would have run toward danger, son. Most people would have kept walking. You didn't. That makes you special." Tiago didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being called special. The man pulled off his gloves and cupped his hands together, blowing warm breath onto his reddened fingers. "Tiago," he said, his voice quieter now, "do you know who I am?" Tiago hesitated. He had tried not to think too hard about it, but the man's face, his white beard, his rosy cheeks, his laugh that seemed to linger even when he wasn't laughing, was all too familiar. You're Santa Claus," Tiago finally said, his voice filled with equal parts disbelief and curiosity. The man chuckled softly, his blue eyes twinkling. "I suppose that's what most people call me. My real name is Nicholas, but Clara insists on keeping the Santa tradition alive." Clara laughed softly, wincing slightly. "It's good branding," she teased, holding the baby closer. Tiago blinked, unsure whether to laugh or ask 1,000 questions. "But why were you here? Why not the North Pole? Why isn't there magic fixing all this?" Santa, or Nicholas, sighed, sitting down heavily beside the flickering lamp. "Even magic has its limits, Tiago. My sleigh wasn't supposed to break, and we weren't supposed to be flying over this part of the world tonight. But weather, machinery, even magic, it can fail." Tiago frowned, the weight of what he'd just been through settling on his shoulders. "So, you're just like everyone else." Nicholas smiled faintly. "In many ways, yes. Except that I've been doing this a very long time, and I've learned that the most powerful magic doesn't come from me. It comes from people like you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Tiago wasn't sure what to say, but Clara's voice broke the silence. "Nicholas," she said softly, "we need to name him." She looked down at the baby, her face glowing with maternal love. "What do you think, Tiago? Any suggestions?" Tiago's eyes widened. "Me? I don't know. It's not my place." "Of course it is," Clara interrupted gently. "If it weren't for you, he wouldn't be here. Please, help us choose." Tiago hesitated, then smiled. "How about Gabriel? It's a strong name. It means hero of God." Nicholas and Clara exchanged a look, and Clara nodded. "Gabriel it is." As they shared a moment of quiet joy, Tiago's thoughts drifted to his mother. She was waiting for him at home, sick and fragile. She would be worried by now, yet something about this night, the miracle he had just been part of, felt bigger than anything he could explain. Nicholas seemed to sense Tiago's unease. "You've done something extraordinary tonight, Tiago. But I can see there's more on your mind." Tiago glanced down at his hands, unsure how to put his feelings into words. "My mom, she's sick, and I don't know if I can do anything to help her." Nicholas placed a hand on Tiago's shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You've already helped more than you know. Sometimes, all it takes is hope, and the courage to keep believing in it." Tiago nodded slowly, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the man's words. As the night deepened, the snow outside fell softly, blanketing the world in a hush. And though the cabin was cold and far from perfect, it felt, for the first time in years, like Tiago had found something magical. The first light of dawn began to peek through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, casting faint golden rays across the room. Clara dozed off, her breathing steady, with baby Gabriel swaddled snugly in her arms. Tiago sat on the floor, his back against the wall, staring into the flickering light of the kerosene lamp. Nicholas, who had been quietly tending to the fire, finally broke the silence. "You've done more than most adults would in your shoes," Nicholas said, his voice deep and warm. He turned to Tiago, his eyes twinkling with gratitude. "Clara and I owe you everything." Tiago gave a small shrug, feeling awkward under the weight of such praise. "Anyone would have helped if they saw you needed." Nicholas chuckled. "I don't think that's true, but it doesn't matter, because you did." He stood, brushing snow off his red pants. "Now, I must repay your kindness. Anything you want, Tiago. Just name it." The boy blinked, caught off guard. "Anything." Nicholas nodded. "Anything. Toys, riches, a home. Whatever your heart desires." Tiago's mind raced. A new house would make life easier. Toys and riches sounded like a dream. But as he looked at Clara and baby Gabriel, a thought formed in his mind, soft and persistent. It wasn't about him at all. He stood up, his breath visible in the cold air, and faced Nicholas. "I don't want toys or money," he said firmly. Nicholas tilted his head, intrigued. "Then what?" Tiago hesitated, his throat tightening. He thought of his mother, lying in bed, her laughter and joy buried beneath years of struggle. "My mom used to love Christmas," he said quietly. "She would bake cookies, sing carols, and tell me stories about the magic of the season. But ever since she got sick, she doesn't believe in it anymore." Nicholas listened intently, his expression softening as Tiago continued. "She's the best person I know, but she's lost hope," Tiago said, his voice faltering. "So, if you can do anything, I just want her to believe in Christmas again. I just want to see her smile." For a long moment, Nicholas didn't speak. He stared at Tiago, his eyes glistening, his hands clasped tightly together. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You could have asked for anything, anything. And this is what you choose." Tiago nodded, his resolve unwavering. Nicholas let out a breathy laugh, wiping at his eyes. "You're something special, Tiago, truly." He stepped closer, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make your wish come true." A soft noise from the corner drew their attention. Clara stirred, smiling faintly as she watched the exchange. "Nicholas," she murmured, "you always said Christmas was about miracles. I think this boy just reminded you of that." Nicholas gave a soft chuckle, his cheeks redder than the cold could account for. "He did, and it's a lesson I'll never forget." Tiago managed a small smile, but his heart felt heavy. Would his wish be enough to make a difference? He wasn't sure, but in that moment, he realized that trusting Nicholas and the magic of Christmas might be the greatest leap of faith he'd ever take. The morning sun hung low in the sky as Nicholas guided Tiago back toward the edge of the forest. The sleigh, battered but repaired just enough with strips of leather and makeshift wooden braces, glided softly behind them. Clara and baby Gabriel rested inside, snug under thick blankets. Tiago hesitated as they reached the familiar streets of Mill Creek, where the quaint houses were decorated with cheerful lights and wreaths. The stark contrast to his own home tugged at his chest, but he pushed the feeling aside. He turned to Nicholas. "It's not much," Tiago said quietly, "but it's home." Nicholas gave him a soft smile. "Lead the way." Tiago took a deep breath and trudged forward, guiding the sleigh down a narrow lane. At the very end stood his house, a small, weathered structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. Smoke no longer puffed from the chimney, and the windows were dark. It looked almost lifeless in the snowy landscape. Nicholas helped Clara down from the sleigh, leaving her and Gabriel bundled safely inside while he and Tiago stepped toward the front door. Tiago pushed it open gently, careful not to let it creak too loudly. Inside, the air was cold, and the faint scent of chamomile tea lingered. A small Christmas tree, bare except for a string of paper stars, stood in the corner. Tiago's mother, Joanna, lay on a thin mattress in the center of the room, wrapped in blankets. Her face was pale, her hands frail, but she stirred as they entered, her tired eyes fluttering open. "Tiago." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Hi, Mama," Tiago said, kneeling beside her. He took her hand gently, his warmth seeming to breathe life back into her. "I'm home, and I brought someone to meet you." Nicholas stepped forward, his towering figure filling the room. He removed his hat, holding it respectfully over his chest. "Joanna," he said warmly, "it's an honor to meet you." Joanna's brow furrowed as she studied him. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. She looked back at Tiago, confusion and concern in her eyes. "He helped me," Tiago explained, though he left out the more fantastical details. "They were in trouble, and we helped each other. But he says he wants to help us too." Joanna gave a faint smile, though her exhaustion was evident. "Tiago, you've always had such a kind heart," she murmured. "But we're fine. We manage." "No," Tiago said firmly, his voice breaking slightly. "We're not fine, Mama. You're not fine. And it's okay to let someone help us for once." Nicholas knelt beside her, his expression tender but serious. "Tiago is right. You've carried so much, for so long. Let me lighten that burden, just a little. It's Christmas, Joanna, and no one should face it alone." Joanna's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly turned her head, embarrassed. "We've had hard years," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But it's not just about us. There are so many who need more than we do. And that's why I'm here," Nicholas said, his tone steady. "Not just for you, but for the whole town. This is where it begins, Joanna. With you and Tiago." Her tears spilled over then, and Tiago wrapped his arms around her. She clung to him, her frailty more evident than ever, but for the first time in years, hope flickered in her eyes. Outside, Clara peeked through the sleigh's window, watching the scene unfold. She smiled faintly and whispered to her newborn, "Your papa always says he delivers gifts, but I think tonight he's found something even better to give." That evening, the stars shimmered like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky, and Mill Creek lay silent under its snowy blanket. Nicholas sat near the repaired sleigh outside Tiago's home, his mind spinning with plans. Clara had fallen asleep with Gabriel nestled close, and Tiago was inside, ensuring Joanna was comfortable. Nicholas reached into the deep pockets of his coat, pulling out a small brass bell etched with swirling designs. He turned it in his hands, its faint glow illuminating his thoughtful expression. "This town needs something extraordinary," he murmured to himself, "something to remind them of what Christmas is truly about." As if on cue, the sleigh gave a faint shimmer. The repairs he and Tiago had patched earlier began to glow, faint traces of gold running along the cracks. Nicholas grinned. The magic wasn't at full strength yet, but it was waking up. Moments later, Tiago emerged from the house, rubbing his arms against the cold. "Is she okay?" Nicholas asked. Tiago nodded. "She's resting." She smiled, though. "I haven't seen her do that in a long time." Nicholas smiled back, patting the boy on the shoulder. "Good. That smile is just the beginning." Tiago tilted his head curiously. "What do you mean?" Nicholas stood, his large frame casting a shadow on the snow. "Do you trust me, Tiago?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "I guess I do." "Good," Nicholas said, a twinkle in his eye, "because I'm going to need your help to make a little magic happen." Together, they began to plan. Nicholas explained his vision, a Christmas celebration that would transform Mill Creek, one that would restore hope to every heart in town. It would require effort, secrecy, and above all, the the belief of the townsfolk themselves. "We can't do this alone," Nicholas said. "Magic can start things, but it's people who make it real." Tiago thought for a moment. Then his face lit up. "I know someone who can help." By the next morning, Tiago and Nicholas stood outside the small bakery on Main Street, where Mr. Hensley was setting out trays of cinnamon rolls. The older man looked up, surprised to see them together. "Tiago, and who's your friend?" Mr. Hensley asked, his brow furrowing as he studied Nicholas. "This is Mr. Nicholas," Tiago said quickly, avoiding the whole Santa Claus explanation. "He has a plan to make Christmas amazing for everyone this year, but we need help." Mr. Hensley leaned on the counter, curious. "What kind of help?" Nicholas stepped forward, his voice calm and persuasive. "A celebration, a feast, music, gifts for the children, something to bring the town together. I can provide the magic, but the heart of it has to come from you all." Mr. Hensley scratched his chin. "A celebration, huh? I don't have much to give, but I can bake a few extra loaves." "That's all we need to start," Nicholas said with a knowing smile. Word spread quickly. By midday, Tiago and Nicholas had visited nearly every corner of Mill Creek. The butcher offered to prepare roasted meats. The tailor promised decorations and costumes. Even the shy librarian pledged to lend books for storytelling. As more people joined in, Nicholas's magic began to ripple through the town. Windows that had been dark and empty now glowed with light. Families who had stayed indoors for months stepped out to share ideas and laughter. By nightfall, Mill Creek's sleepy streets were buzzing with excitement. At the heart of it all, Tiago stood beside Nicholas, watching the transformation with wide-eyed wonder. "You did this," Nicholas said, his voice full of pride. Tiago shook his head. "We did this." Nicholas chuckled. "Indeed. And the best is yet to come." Christmas Eve descended upon Mill Creek, and the town square, once barren and lifeless, now radiated with festive energy. Strings of golden lights crisscrossed above, glittering like stars. Evergreen wreaths adorned every lamp post, and the smell of roasted chestnuts wafted through the crisp air. At the center of the square stood a towering pine tree, decorated with ribbons, popcorn garlands, and ornaments lovingly donated by the townsfolk. At its very top sat a star that seemed to glow brighter than any light in the sky. Tiago stood by the tree, staring in awe as the square filled with people. They came in waves, carrying trays of food, musical instruments, and gifts wrapped in simple paper. Nicholas was right. When given the chance, people wanted to believe in something bigger than themselves. Nearby, Nicholas adjusted the reins on his repaired sleigh, which now gleamed as if brand new. Clara, bundled warmly, sat on a bench with Gabriel in her arms, watching the bustling scene with a serene smile. The sound of bells jingling drew Tiago's attention, and he turned to see Nicholas stepping up onto a small stage that had been quickly assembled near the tree. His presence commanded silence, and the murmuring crowd stilled, all eyes turning to him. Nicholas raised his hands, his voice booming but warm. "Merry Christmas, Mill Creek." The crowd erupted in cheers, children laughing and clapping as parents held them close. This year, Nicholas continued, "We've faced challenges that tested our strength and our hope. But tonight, we come together to remember what Christmas is truly about. Love, kindness, and the magic we create when we believe in each other." He gestured toward Tiago, who suddenly felt every pair of eyes on him. Nicholas smiled. This young man reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Sometimes, the greatest gift isn't something you can hold. It's the hope you give to others. A ripple of applause spread through the crowd as Tiago, cheeks burning, gave a shy wave. "And now," Nicholas said, his blue eyes twinkling, "let's celebrate the way Christmas was meant to be celebrated, with joy." On cue, the sleigh bells jingled, and the back of the sleigh opened to reveal its contents. A mountain of wrapped gifts, each one sparkling as if enchanted. Children gasped, their eyes wide with wonder. Nicholas began calling out names, handing presents to every child who came forward. But it wasn't just toys. Families received baskets of food, warm blankets, and tools to help them through the winter. The town square buzzed with gratitude as neighbors shared what they had received, marveling at the thoughtfulness of it all. Joanna, sitting in a borrowed wheelchair near the front of the crowd, clutched a hand-knit scarf to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered, looking up at the tree. Tiago knelt beside her, his eyes glistening with emotion. "It's Christmas, Mama. It's ours again." As the celebration continued, the townsfolk began singing carols, their voices rising into the frosty night. Nicholas stood to the side, watching with a satisfied smile. Clara joined him. Gabriel nestled against her shoulder. "You've outdone yourself," she said, leaning against him. "It wasn't me," Nicholas replied, his gaze settling on Tiago. It was all him. As the final notes of Silent Night filled the air, Nicholas stepped forward once more, raising his hand. "Tonight is only the beginning. Let's carry this spirit forward, not just for today, but every day. Merry Christmas to you all." The crowd erupted in cheers, the warmth of their joy spilling out into the cold, starry night. But for Tiago and his mother, it was more than a celebration. It was the return of something they had thought lost forever, the magic of hope. As the festivities continued, Nicholas stepped down from the stage and made his way through the crowd. His vibrant red coat caught the glow of the golden lights, and he stopped often to greet children, shake hands, and share a laugh. But his steps slowed as he approached the small gathering where Tiago and Joanna sat by the fire. "May I join you?" Nicholas asked, his tone warm. Joanna nodded, her smile tentative but genuine. "Please have a seat." Nicholas lowered himself onto a wooden crate, resting his hands on his knees. He glanced at Tiago, then back at Joanna. "You've raised a remarkable boy," he said, his voice soft. Joanna's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to touch Tiago's hand. "He's my greatest blessing," she whispered. Tiago, flustered, looked away. "It's not a big deal. I just did what I thought was right." Nicholas chuckled. "That's the heart of it, Tiago. Doing what's right, even when it's hard. That's what makes all the difference." Joanna studied Nicholas, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're not just a kind man, are you?" she asked hesitantly. "There's something about you." Nicholas smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I've been called many things over the years. A storyteller, a toy maker, a legend. But tonight, I'm simply someone who believes in the magic of Christmas." Joanna shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "It's been so long since I felt anything like this. Hope, joy, things I thought I'd lost." She looked at Nicholas with a sudden intensity. "But how? How did you bring all this here?" Nicholas reached out and gently clasped her hand. "I didn't do it alone," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Your son gave me the most important gift of all. He reminded me that the true magic of Christmas doesn't come from presents or sleighs. It comes from people, from their courage, their kindness, and their love." Joanna's lip trembled, and she quickly wiped at her eyes. Nicholas continued, "Which is why I've made a decision. Starting tonight, things are going to change for you, Joanna." She looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" Nicholas leaned forward, his tone steady and reassuring. "You've carried so much for so long, but no more. Starting tomorrow, you'll receive the medical care you need to heal. And when you're ready, there will be a new job waiting for you, a chance to create beautiful things and share them with the world." Joanna gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "I don't know what to say." Tiago's heart swelled with joy, his mind racing at the thought of his mother healthy and happy again. "Really? You can do that?" Nicholas nodded solemnly. "Consider it my promise to you both. This is only the beginning." Joanna covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. "Thank you," she whispered through her tears. "Thank you for everything." Nicholas placed a hand on Tiago's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "You've shown me what it means to truly believe, Tiago. Now it's my turn to make sure your belief brings more than just a moment of magic. It brings a lifetime of it." As the fire crackled, and the voices of carolers filled the air, Nicholas stood, pulling his coat tight against the cold. He looked down at Tiago, his expression serious but kind. There's still more to do tonight, but I'll be back before sunrise. Take care of your mother and yourself. Tiago nodded, his heart pounding with gratitude and wonder. Thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas gave a warm smile, then turned, his figure blending into the glow of the town square as he disappeared into the crowd. Joanna leaned back in her chair, looking at Tiago with an expression of awe. Do you think he's really? Tiago smiled, his gaze fixed on the spot where Nicholas had vanished. Yeah, Mama, I think he is. As the night deepened and the celebration began to wind down, Tiago found himself standing near the towering Christmas tree, staring up at the glowing star perched on top. His mother was resting comfortably by the fire, surrounded by neighbors who had embraced her as if no time had passed. For the first time in years, she seemed at ease, a spark of life returning to her weary face. Nicholas approached quietly, his boots crunching in the snow. It's been quite a night, hasn't it? Tiago turned to him, his eyes shining with gratitude. You've done so much already. My mom smiled, really smiled. That hasn't happened in so long. Nicholas gave a nod, his expression thoughtful. She has hope again. That's a powerful thing. Tiago hesitated, his gaze dropping to the snow. I know you said you'd help her. You've already done more than I could have ever imagined. But Nicholas tilted his head, sensing there was more. But what, Tiago? The boy took a deep breath, gathering his courage. There are so many people out there like us. People who've lost hope, who think Christmas doesn't mean anything anymore. I've seen in my town, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere. Nicholas listened intently, his hands clasped in front of him. So, Tiago continued, his voice steady. I want to ask one more thing. I want you to keep doing this. Not just for us, but for everyone. Keep spreading hope to the people who need it most. Promise me you won't stop. For a moment, Nicholas didn't speak. He looked at Tiago, his face unreadable, and then his eyes softened. He knelt down so they were at eye level, his gloved hands resting on Tiago's shoulders. You're asking for something much bigger than you realize, Nicholas said, his voice quiet but firm. It's not an easy promise to make. Tiago met his gaze, unflinching. I know, but I also know you can do it. You're Santa Claus. A smile crept onto Nicholas's face, and for the first time that night, Tiago thought he saw a tear glimmering in the corner of the man's eye. You're wiser than your years, Tiago, Nicholas said, his voice thick with emotion. And you've reminded me why I do what I do. Spreading hope. It's not just my job. It's my purpose. He squeezed Tiago's shoulders gently, his expression resolute. I promise you, I'll never stop. As long as there are people who need hope, I'll be there. Tiago smiled, his chest swelling with pride and relief. Thank you. Nicholas stood, his towering frame casting a long shadow in the glow of the tree lights. No, Tiago, he said softly. Thank you. You've given me something I thought I'd lost, a reason to believe all over again. The two stood in silence for a moment, the cold air around them filled with the quiet hum of the town. Above them, the stars twinkled brighter than ever, as if the universe itself was listening. The first light of dawn began to edge over the horizon, painting the snowy town of Mill Creek in soft shades of pink and gold. The town square was quieter now, though the remnants of the night's celebration still sparkled. Garlands of lights, empty mugs of cocoa, and a towering tree that seemed to glow even brighter in the early morning. Nicholas stood near his sleigh, fastening the final straps as Clara and Gabriel waited warmly, bundled inside. The sleigh shimmered faintly, its magical glow returning to full strength. Tiago approached him, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. Leaving already? He asked, his voice tinged with sadness. Nicholas turned, smiling gently. The work is never done, Tiago. There are still many places to visit, and many people who need a little magic. Tiago nodded, though his heart felt heavy. Will I see you again? Nicholas hesitated, then leaned closer, You might not see me the way you do now, he said softly, but I'll always be around. Every time someone finds hope, every time a kindness is shared, that's where I'll be. Tiago smiled faintly. I think I understand. Nicholas climbed into the sleigh but paused, his gaze lingering on Tiago. You've given me more than you realize, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. More than anyone ever has. Tiago tilted his head, puzzled. How? Nicholas's blue eyes shimmered, and for a moment, his usual composure faltered. A single tear slipped down his cheek, glittering like liquid gold. He quickly brushed it away, but not before Tiago noticed. You've reminded me why I started all of this, Nicholas continued, his voice breaking slightly. It's not the gifts or the traditions, it's the people. It's the love we give and the hope we share, even when it seems like the world has forgotten us. Tiago blinked, his own eyes misting over. I think you needed this Christmas as much as we did. Nicholas laughed softly, his cheeks redder than the cold could explain. Perhaps I did, my boy. Perhaps I did. The jingling of the sleigh's bells broke the moment, signaling it was time. Clara waved from her seat, her smile warm and motherly. Nicholas raised the reins, his expression one of calm determination. Take care of your mother, Tiago, and take care of yourself. You have a light inside you. Don't let it fade. I won't, Tiago promised, standing tall despite the lump in his throat. With a flick of the reins, the sleigh began to lift, the snow beneath it swirling in a magical spiral. Tiago stepped back, watching as it rose higher and higher into the dawn sky. Before disappearing among the clouds, Nicholas called out one last time, his voice ringing clear and strong. Merry Christmas, Tiago, and thank you for everything. Tiago stood alone in the square, the snow gently falling around him, but his heart felt fuller than ever. Above him, the faint jingle of bells lingered in the air, a reminder of the man who had left, but whose promise would never fade. Weeks passed, and the magic of Christmas seemed to linger in Mill Creek long after the holiday lights came down. Tiago's once quiet life now buzzed with new energy. His mother, Joanna, had begun her treatment, and her strength was returning little by little. Each day, her laughter came easier, her voice steadier, and her eyes brighter. Their home, once cold and dim, was now warm and bustling. Neighbors, inspired by the miraculous events of Christmas Eve, visited often with kind words, meals, and offers of help. Joanna had even begun crafting again, her hands finding joy in creating beautiful scarves and ornaments that quickly became the talk of the town. Tiago, meanwhile, had become somewhat of a local hero. Children followed him through the streets, their faces lighting up as he shared stories of hope and magic. Though he never revealed all the details of that fateful night, the spark he'd lit in the community continued to grow. It was during one of those snowy evenings, as Tiago walked home from the bakery with a loaf of bread under his arm, that he stopped in the middle of Main Street. Above him, the stars twinkled in the deep winter sky, and he felt the same warmth he'd felt on Christmas Eve. He whispered, "Thank you, Nicholas." Wherever you are, the following Christmas Eve, the town square was alive with celebration once again. This time, it was Tiago who stood at the center organizing games, handing out warm drinks, and ensuring that every family felt included. Joanna, standing by the tree, watched her son with pride. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and she wore a vibrant scarf of her own making. "He's becoming quite the leader," remarked Mr. Hensley, who stood beside her with a steaming mug of cider. "He always was," Joanna replied, her smile radiant. When the night was at its peak, Tiago climbed onto a small stage near the tree, raising his hands for silence. The crowd hushed, their eyes fixed on him. "Last year," Tiago began, his voice steady and full of warmth, "someone reminded me what Christmas is really about. It's not just the lights or the gifts. It's the love we share, the hope we bring, and the magic we create for each other." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Tiago wasn't done. "This year, let's keep that spirit alive. Let's make sure no one in our town feels forgotten. not just on Christmas, but every day. As the applause filled the square, Tiago felt a familiar presence, as if someone was watching from afar. He glanced up at the stars, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a sleigh silhouetted against the moon, its bells jingling softly on the wind. A smile spread across his face, and he whispered, "I'll keep my promise, Nicholas. Just like you kept yours." And so, under the glow of the Christmas tree and the watchful stars above, Tiago began a new chapter, not just for himself or his mother, but for the entire town. Together, they carried the magic of that one unforgettable night into the future, ensuring that hope and kindness would forever be the heart of Mill Creek.